Let's start with the basis that a lithium-based electric vehicle absorbs a huge amount of energy in its creation. And most of the lithium processing, most of the aluminum processing, most of the silicon processing, and that's what's in the frames, is all done in China, and it's all done with soft coal. So the carbon footprint for these things is not being factored into most people's carbon assessments when you're determining where the break-even price is in terms of carbon. If you do that, there are any place in the world that runs on a mix that is more than 70% fossil fuel, which is the vast majority, you're talking at a break-even time that approaches a decade, if not more. And that's for light vehicles. You get into heavies, it extends it out considerably. Now, there aren't a lot of EV heavy vehicles, so take that for what it is. So that's problem number one. Problem number two, if you want to electrify transport in North America, you need to double the size of the grid. That would obviously be a challenge.
Double the size.
Yeah, so what we've done in the last 150 years, double that in the next 7. So both of these things are things that politically you can ignore if you want to, and you can throw enough money at it to make it happen. It doesn't make them impossible, it just makes them perhaps not the best idea. But there is something out there that makes it impossible. If you want to double the size of the grid, if you want to electrify transport, and if you want to do it on a schedule that people say we want to achieve by 2030, that means we need 3 times as much copper, 4 times as much chromium, 4 times as much aluminum, 10 times as much nickel, 18 times as much graphite. Never in human history have we ever doubled our production of any industrial material in a 10-year period, ever. And we're going to do this for 14 materials now?
Simultaneously.
Right. And we're losing Russian output, and the Russians are a top 4 producer for about half of this stuff. And we're going to lose the processing capacity in China. So this cannot happen with today's technology. It just can't. This stuff isn't there. Does that mean we will walk away from it completely? Not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is we're going to have to make choices about where we want to apply these materials and where we can get the biggest bang for our buck. Now, if this was done purely looking at economics and carbon, I would put wind turbines throughout the Great Plains, including in Alberta. I would put solar in the American Southwest, roughly from central Texas and the Austin-San Antonio corridor, all the way to Los Angeles. Yeah. And then I would spend most of the money and most of the resources that we have on transmission from those zones to the places that don't. And that would probably gobble up almost all of the material, or like our, quote, share of global materials. Now, the materials are not available globally. So we're going to be able to do more in the Western Hemisphere than the Eastern, but we also have better wind and solar frontage in the Western Hemisphere than the Eastern. But putting up solar panels, the only place in the world that it's dumber to put solar panels up than Toronto is Berlin. And so these are the 2 capitals that are pushing this the hardest. It's just absolutely asinine. One of the fun things that we're seeing in the green community right now is a conversation which is degrading into a debate, which is degrading into a knife fight between the Greens of California and the Greens of Germany. Because the 2 of them have very similar policies when it comes to encouraging renewables. The Californians have spent 1/3 as much as the Germans and are getting 5 times the power because the sun doesn't shine in Germany.
Yes.
But it does in California. This is a conversation they should have had 15 years ago. Basic geography and what it means for technology. They're having it now. It's overdue, but I'm glad they're having it. And if you start playing the results of that conversation against this materials shortage we're coming across, the Greens are going to be the ones at the lead of deciding where this works and where it doesn't. And that is absolutely the community we want making this decision. We're not there yet, but we are rapidly moving in the right direction. EVs don't make the cut. You would have to have a green system to manufacture them, and you would have to power them with green, and it would have to be in a society where everyone can charge their cars at the day, which means they're all working night shift.
Right.
I am unaware of a metro where that exists. So EVs just don't work in a constrained environment. So you focus on generation where generation does well, and then you use transmission to get it to the next tier of cities beyond that zone. That's still a really good start. Well, let's start with the supply issue because it's relevant for nuclear too. Single largest supplier of uranium to the world is Kazakhstan. And most of that stuff is processed in either China or Russia. So we honestly can't, that's like 40% of global supply that is under a degree of threat right there. So while I certainly agree that nuclear should be part of the solution, we do have an absolute limit as to how big it can get, even before you consider the political obstacles.
Saskatchewan does have a lot of uranium too.
That is true. And Canada and Australia are the two countries that are expanding their output most quickly. But it's just the process for bringing uranium on doesn't just involve the mine, and then it's the milling, then it's the yellowcake, and then it's the hexafluoride processing and the spinning down. There's a lot of infrastructure steps before you get to fuel. So a really big investment program right now, you're talking minimum 10 years before you actually get the fuel and volume, and that doesn't count the time it takes to build the reactor. So it's a long-term solution if we're going to do it. And then in the United States, at least, we still don't have a fuel disposition program. We have Yucca Mountain, which is still not operational, which is already completely subscribed. And so everyone's basically leaving them in coolant ponds right on site, which is not, in my opinion, a very viable long-term solution. Now, other countries have come up with ways to make it work better. The technology is there, but it would require multiple acts of Congress to push that forward. And the Soviets, not the Russians, the Soviets were very successful in the 60s in encouraging anti-nuclear sentiment throughout the Western world. I mean, honestly, that's where Greenpeace came from. And a lot of that lingers today. And then, of course, every once in a while you have a Chernobyl or a Fukushima, and that doesn't help. It's probably going to take a new technology, of which there are two that are probably about ready for prototype stage. So one of them is called a pebble bed. It's a fourth generation nuclear facility. The French are probably the closest to building it. And the fuel's in pebbles in a bed of insulated material. So even if like everyone shuts down all the safety protocols and like leaves for the weekend, there's not enough uranium in each individual pellet to go into meltdown. So in theory, it's meltdown proof. In theory, you still have to build it. The second one are small modular reactors that you can fit in a container on the back of a truck. And the idea is you can pull that into a decommissioned coal power plant and just hook it up to the electricity system.
Right.
And all of a sudden, 3/4 of the cost of a normal reactor goes away. And based on the size of the power plant, you can put up to 9 of these into a single arrangement. The United States government just gave approval to the prototype design. And so they're now going to be building one of those over the next couple of years. So hopefully we'll find out within a couple of years whether it's viable and safe. But if it is, you still then have to go through the process of bringing it into mass manufacture.
Right.
And so you're really talking about 2030 before we get any appreciable movement in this in terms of actually affecting the grid.
Yeah, not a short-term solution, but small modular reactors are looked at here, or SMRs. You know, you can walk the streets of Calgary and hear people talking about SMRs, are looked at with a lot of favorability.
It's promising. It's promising. But again, no one has built one yet. So let's not get ahead of ourselves.
Right. Although many say that American nuclear submarines have very similar technology.
Very different technology. So the water-cooled reactors that are in subs are, if anything, very old technology.
Of course.
And if you're going to apply those in scale, you're talking about something that is far more proliferation prone than a conventional reactor. Keep in mind that because it's a military asset and it is by definition sequestered and under guard at all times, they don't use low enriched uranium in the subs. They use weapons grade uranium, and that's how it can be so small. You would not want a Bubba in North Dakota operating that.